good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining. Dr. Slater, you may begin.
Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on what time zone you're in. I'm Dr. Bethany Slater, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's joint webinar with Asensus Surgical and IPEG. We're very excited to present to you Surgical AI, Beyond Robotics, the Digital Frontier. We have multiple esteemed speakers who will be sharing and discussing their insights and expertise on the latest advancements in the digital frontier. First, Brian Stelmach, VP of Digital Solutions with Asensus Surgical, will present on surgical AI and the tools being developed and utilized in digital surgery today. Following that, we will have a panel discussion featuring Dr. Stephanie Polides of the Mayo Clinic and Dr. Stephen Rothenberg of Rocky Mountain Hospital for Children. This discussion will be moderated by Dr. Ed Chekin, the VP of Medical Affairs and Professional Education with Asensus Surgical. During the presentation and panel discussion, please feel free to submit your questions through the chat function at any time during the webinar, and we will address as many as we can. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brian Stelmach.
Thank you so much, Dr. Slater. Great to be with you. Special thanks to IPEG for co-hosting this webinar. Definitely excited to be here amongst the other presenters and panelists in order to really set the stage for the discussion that's to come and dive in a little bit on the digital solutions that are available today and hopefully give a little bit of an insight into what this might look like in the digital frontier, the digital future for surgery. So with that, as Asensus, we're a public company and I need to give our forward-looking statement disclosure for the safe harbor here. And for those of you that are not familiar with Asensus, Asensus Surgical, we are an early commercial stage company that's focused on ushering in a new era of minimally invasive surgery. And we're kind of built on this idea and this belief in digitizing the interface between surgeons and patients in order to pioneer a new era of performance-guided surgery by unlocking clinical intelligence, mostly through data and digital solutions, to enable consistently superior outcomes and a new standard of surgery. The other quick housekeeping note here is on the bottom. Asensus has recently announced it's entered into a non-binding letter of intent with Karl Storz to potentially acquire Asensus, and I can refer you to our investor relations website for more information on that. So with that said, before we get into the current digital technologies and a look at the digital future, I thought it might make sense to take a brief look back at the evolution both of AI and pediatric minimally invasive surgery and see how we might be able to bring these two aspects together. So first, we're looking here at a timeline that was published in Engineering back in 2019 by Wang. And although there's a lot of detail in here, I thought I did a good job of breaking the evolution of AI outside of surgery, this is just general technology AI, into a couple of different eras. So starting off around 1950 with the Turing test, there was an initial interest in AI and a lot of kind of cool applications like chatbots, chess programs, complete checkers. Then after a couple of years, they have what's called the AI winter here, where there was a little bit of a trough of disillusionment and not a lot of new innovation or research and development activities that were going on. And I think a lot of this was around the lack of computing power, even if the base mathematics were available, wasn't really the computing power wasn't really available in order to have an impact on daily life. So then around the mid 1990s or so, there was this resurgence where AI started to become a science. There was a real acceleration in computing power, the evolution of GPUs and access to cloud compute, which has really accelerated things. And I'd argue that now you could almost show an increased acceleration in the past couple of years with the advent of generative AI. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is if we compare this to the evolution of pediatric minimally invasive surgery by looking at publications and citations over the past couple of decades since the early 90s, there's kind of a similar evolution here where there was an initial increase with sills and robotics, a little bit of a plateau, and then a resurgence over the past 10, 15 years to kind of accelerate the adoption and the publications around advancements in pediatric MIS. So I think one of the things that is interesting here is kind of a common evolution as well as potential for accelerated adoption moving forward. And I think the thing that I would like to pose here is, isn't it time for a convergence of AI and digital solutions with pediatric minimally invasive surgery? And as I propose that, just a quick look at the AI toolbox, and I call this the AI Plus toolbox for a reason, but I'll get to that in a second. Refresher on what artificial intelligence is and how some of this terminology plays as subsets. So we've got the umbrella term of AI, ML, which is a subset of that, deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning, and then ultimately generative AI. And each play an important role, but I think a specific role where you could have basic AI, which requires less computing power if you're just doing things like decision trees, but can ultimately provide solutions that are human-like in results. Then you could go to a more complex machine learning approach, which is using more complex things like linear regression or nearest neighbor approaches to do interpretations and predictions of more complex data without specific programming. Then you get down into deep learning, where you might have multi-layer neural networks in order to make sense of more disparate data sets and be able to provide more complex and ultimately potentially more accurate predictions. And then the most current trend with things like large language models or large multimodality models for generative AI, where you're actually taking these large data sets and generating some new and original content. So all that is the AI toolbox, and I think where the plus comes in is when you're able to combine that with some things like computer vision, which happen in real time during surgery through laparoscopic video cameras, and big data and cloud-enabled technologies. It allows you to provide a lot more benefits. And one of the things that I'd like to hopefully leave here while we're talking about AI is that that's really the underlying technology, and it's great and can help accelerate a lot of different aspects. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is provide solutions, and in our case, surgical solutions. So what we hope to provide is leveraging this underlying technology, but really augment or enhance intelligence. So what the augmented intelligence terminology is really machine learning and predictive data analytics to enhance human ability to perform better. So really providing data and insights when they matter most to help augment or enhance decision, in this case, surgical decision support. And Asensus approaches this in a fairly holistic approach, looking to provide a comprehensive solution to surgeons and hospitals in order to provide this performance-guided surgery and the clinical intelligence and real-time support tools. And there's basically three vectors across which we look to provide solutions in order to drive toward that comprehensive solution. I'll go into a little bit of detail on each of these three, but the first is robotic telemanipulation. The second one is intraoperative augmented intelligence with real-time clinical guidance. And the third one is the cloud-enabled integrations and solutions. So for those of you that aren't aware, Asensus does have a currently available pediatric approved device called the Senhance Surgical System, which was developed to address some of the challenges in surgery while maintaining the benefits of minimally invasive approaches. We do that in a couple of ways. The first is with a multi-arm system. It provides flexibility of placement for both the arms, the surgical team, as well as trocars. We also have 5mm as well as 3mm instruments in reusable configurations to help control costs and provide those benefits of smaller incisions. There's also an open console that has eye tracking technology to eliminate the need for independent surgeon-controlled cameras. And then it does leverage or mimic a familiar laparoscopic motion. So as opposed to a one-to-one direction of open surgery, it does leverage the straight stick approach of laparoscopic for commonality. Part of that Senhance system is what we call the Intelligent Surgical Unit, or ISU. And this is really the heart and the brains of the system that enables the machine or computer vision and enables also the augmented intelligence and real-time surgical support. And that shows up in a couple of different ways. The first thing that we try to do is inform surgical decisions through technologies like digital measurements to guide surgical maneuvers. Look to improve OR efficiency with things like hands-free camera control. Hopefully enrich medical education through digital tags and optimal OR communications. And in the future, leverage our base technologies to help avoid preventable errors through activities like identification of critical anatomy to mitigate the risk of tissue damage. So to get slightly more technical, but hopefully give a little bit of context for how this actually works in practice from a data management standpoint, take a look at the data flow into and out of the ISU, with the ultimate goal of providing benefit across the surgical continuum, including preoperative planning, intraoperative decision support, and postoperative analysis. So if you take a look at the data flow here, it all starts with the generation of data in the OR during a procedure. And that can be through the surgeon console, the laparoscopic video tower with the raw video data, as well as kinematics from the robotic arms. All that data is input into the ISU, and it can, with its edge capabilities, provide some real-time augmented intelligence during the procedure. But it can also take that data when connected to the Asensus private cloud, basically leverage that data for two really important pathways and solutions. The first one is the more straightforward one if we follow across the top through to a customer portal. This data can be collected, anonymized, and pooled and provided to a surgeon to look at their performance versus others, as well as provide videos and case assessments. So that's the more straightforward path, and I'll dive in the next slide into a little bit more detail there. But the second pathway is a little bit more complex, where we actually take that anonymized data, tag it, annotate it, use that to train some deep learning AI engines, and then use those engines to provide algorithms, to provide structured surgical insights in different applications. Once we have those applications and the algorithms finalized, we can then update the software in the ISU, which is in the OR, and provide more and better real-time solutions. One of the examples here, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail, is an overlay showing 3D measurement. So that's a high-level overview of how the technology works and how the ISU helps facilitate those second and third tiers, the real-time augmented intelligence, as well as the cloud-enabled solutions. And here we just have a quick overview of the analytics dashboard through the customer portal. This is my view, so I won't have any surgical data because I don't have any surgeries under my belt at this stage. But what you will see is the pooled anonymized data. So you can see here, I've got my own account. So if I did have surgeries, I would have access to my own data. I can take a look at what the latest cases were that I've completed, as well as some of the analytics like total number of cases, cases by month. I could go in and change that to just look over the past 3 months. And I can also compare myself to the averages of other surgeons that are using the Senhance platform. I can also look at procedure duration and select if I'm a colorectal surgeon, maybe other colorectal procedures in particular, and compare my my stats to others in that particular situation. I can also see things like instruments used, the time I use each instrument, as well as the digital features used and how long, as well as get a breakdown of the different types of procedures that are done. So that's an overview of the dashboard. I can also go into the case library here and select a particular case that's been done. In this case, I'll look at a gastric sleeve. It'll pop up the details, some high-level case info like the duration, the tools used, as well as provide access to the full video. If I'm working with colleagues or training a resident, I might want to jump to a particular point in the video, show a specific technique. I can also download the video. This is just being downloaded through Chrome. So once it's downloaded, it'll pop up and tell me it's complete. But then I can send it and use it to prepare a talk or also help with training. The timeline here is also a unique feature where you can look at all the different aspects. If I want to see when Smart Zoom was used, there's my download completed. I can click on the Smart Timeline and it'll actually snap to the portion of the video that I'm using that feature. Do it again here. And then if there's more details that you're looking to get into, I could go to the storyboard on the bottom left and actually get a kind of frame by frame, minute by minute. Anytime there's an exchange of tools or a feature used, there'll be an outline of that. So this is currently in a pilot phase, but it's available to most of our connected sites globally. So here I'm just going back and I could select a different case. I could go back to the home screen. And then if I'm using a shared computer, I can also go ahead and log out. So just a quick overview of our current digital dashboard available through Customer Portal. So shifting gears then to the real-time augmented intelligence solutions. These are the currently available solutions on the Senhance. I will say that they're FDA cleared, CE marked, and PMDA approved, but they're using a Storz 10mm 3D integrated camera. So some implications there for pediatrics, obviously. But with this setup, we are able to do automated camera control and manipulation. On the left here, you can see that the tools are identified and the camera arm, that third arm, is actually moving automatically to stay in between those 2 points. Another tool we have is digital tags. If you're looking to communicate to another surgeon in the room or the bedside table, you can actually place a tag on the soft tissue, and then it'll follow that soft tissue throughout camera motion and or if there's deformation or movement of the anatomy itself. So there's like an automatic tracking technology there. And then finally, we have the 3D measurement, where you can see if you have that 3D camera, you're able to measure point to point, in this case on a stomach, to get the overall size of the stomach. You can also do a contour that will measure along the tissue bed and maybe help you identify what a consistent starting point for a staple would be in a gastric sleeve procedure. So these are the current technologies. If we shift gears a little bit into looking into the future, some of the things that we're currently working on leveraging these base technologies are toolkits around safety. So here on the left, you can see maybe an automatic identification of an organ at risk or a sensitive organ that you want to avoid, creating a critical safety zone, and then alerting a surgeon as the instruments get close to that as a reminder that you may want to avoid that area. Also, training toolkits are in the works. So here we're showing a telestration technology where a surgeon outside of the sterile field could provide additional information. In the future, maybe even a surgeon across the world that could help out during a procedure. And these annotations could actually be attached to the tissue rather than just an overlay. So these are works in progress, but part of the digital frontier possibilities. So as we kind of close out the future potential of the digital frontier, I think in general, I'd like to say that there's increasing momentum and overall a lot of bullishness, excitement around the future potential. It'll be partially offset by some challenges like with any new technologies, but overall I think there's a net benefit toward innovation and benefits to surgeons and patients throughout the world by leveraging these digital technologies. Some of the reasons why I do feel positive about this are the virtuous cycle of AI and machine learning driven growth. This virtuous cycle is basically by standardizing data, collecting it over time, and then providing better solutions, there's going to be greater adoption of those solutions. Greater adoption of those solutions means more data generated, which means we can provide better solutions, which means more adoption and more data. And so the flywheel kind of turns and the momentum continues to build. So I think that data collection and leverage is a key aspect of the future potential. The other thing is just generally use, understanding, trust, and explainability of AI within and beyond medical applications will help to overcome the natural resistance to new and unproven technology. So that adoption is a really key part of perpetuating that momentum of the virtuous cycle. And then from an application standpoint, I think leveraging these base technologies that we're talking about, but really applying them to specific use cases where they have where there's the most challenge of complications or inconsistencies within specialties and within procedures within specialties and within specific techniques and phases within those procedures. So that's where collaboration, I think, is going to be key across industry, academia, and clinical users. So there's also obviously going to be some hurdles along the way, things like regulation, continuing challenges around cybersecurity, ensuring privacy and ethical use of AI, I think are all things to consider that'll be balancing the fast evolution and adoption of the digital frontier within surgery. But as I mentioned, I think overall there's a great net benefit. And I wanted to end here with a quote that I saw from a recent article in European Surgery Research, where Gini et al. Mentioned the application of ML and CV within operative robotics are really poised to radically change how we screen, diagnose, risk stratify, treat, and follow up patients in both the pre and post-operative stages, as well as within the operating theaters. So the excitement continues. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and mention that I would really appreciate any feedback that you have to help contribute to the future of digital solutions within pediatric surgery. There's a QR code that just appeared on your screen there. If you take your phone at the ready, it'll bring you to a short survey on Google Forms. Really appreciate any input that you have for us to be able to continue to evolve these digital solutions specifically to meet the needs of pediatric surgeons. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Ed Chekin, who is our VP of Medical Affairs and Professional Education. Over to you, Ed.
Great. Hey, thanks, Brian. Yeah, you gave us a lot to think about here, and I'm still hung up on that first slide of the evolution of AI and the parallels with minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery in conjunction with pediatric surgery. It's kind of provocative as to how those things seem to line up pretty well. yeah, my background is in general surgery and minimally invasive surgery. And one of the things that I'm trying to help out here with Asensus is to figure out the best ways to train people, not just in using the telemanipulator, but how to use some of these new digital tools that are becoming available, some of them in practice and some of them in the future, and how to integrate them into practice or into training programs and things. So, but we have a good group here to talk about it. And if people on the phone have questions, please enter them into the chat. But I think what I'll do is start here with Stephanie, and then I'll ask Steve if he has anything to add on to that, and then go to Steve, and we'll kind of go back and forth like that. So both people have a chance to weigh in, and you guys take this conversation where you want to go. I'm just trying to give you some ideas to talk about. And what I thought I'd start with, Stephanie, is that you've used this kind of Senhance system already, and the idea of eye tracking. I think eye tracking is so much different than, hold the camera and, a little to the left, no, your other left kind of thing, and those instructions that we've all been through and trying to guide people through camera manipulation. How has that kind of stability of the image and just the ability to eye track, influence what you do?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I have used the Senhance system, as you said. I think the eye tracking is probably my favorite part of it at this point, and it is, we're able to use it with our 5mm cameras that we already have, which is great. And it zooms in and out as well, which has been really helpful, because that's something that I think, I work with trainees, I work with residents, I don't work with fellows. So for some of the more complex, minimally invasive pediatric cases, especially the neonatal cases and things where that might be the first time the second or third year resident has seen it before, it is, it can be challenging with the camera, but I also think the trainee running the camera is also like a valuable part of their education, and it sort of engages them in the operation. So you got to balance it with that. But being able to zoom in and out is one of those things too that can be a little bit intangible for them to pick up on when you might want. And the stability is really nice as well, because if you do want to adjust something else, for example, you don't need to like find somebody to hold onto something while you adjust the other things. It will just stay stable. So I think that's a huge development in pediatric minimally invasive surgery with small instruments.
Yeah, so a stable image, that's, it's hard to quantify or to kind of overemphasize really the importance of that and how helpful that is into any kind of surgery to just kind of keep everything where you want it to be in retraction. So Steve, your follow-up on that, maybe if you have comments on eye tracking, but I'd be interested in hearing into your thoughts on this evolution of how we've gone through minimally invasive surgery, from open to minimally invasive into this robotics side of things, and what this we're kind of on this digital frontier, but it's been a long time coming. This, as Brian tried to say, it's been going on for several decades. And how would you kind of position where we are now in the kind of larger sense?
Yeah, so obviously I've been involved in this in a long time, and started doing minimally invasive cases in kids in the early 90s. And it's been an evolution. I mean, when I first started, the only, most of the instrumentation that was available for us to use was 10mm instrumentation. There were no 5mm clips. We had to push hard and long to get the auto suture and Ethicon at the time to develop those. There were very few 5mm instruments. There were almost no 5mm scopes. Everything was 10. And obviously in pediatric surgery, that didn't really work except for in our bigger patients. And so there's been a real push over the time to really develop smaller and smaller instrumentation that now actually has been adopted by a lot of adult surgeons for their patients because of the smaller footprint that it makes, and the instrumentation and the tensile strength of them have improved. At the same time, the digital aspect of all this has evolved as well. And, the biggest component of that has just been in terms of image. going from what the cameras that we used before to finally getting, the digital format, and the view that we get has been exceptional. And then, robotics came into this, and actually, it's 20 years ago that I actually started doing cases with Da Vinci. But after doing that for a couple years, really working for, a couple years, I realized that because, at least in my patient population, it really didn't add anything. And all I was doing was making bigger incisions and taking longer to achieve similar goals. Certainly, I think robotics has expanded. And the other piece that's coming in right now is that all this digital information that we're getting in the cases. So it's not just now we have these enhanced views. There's all sorts of, augmented viewing facilities, like using ICG, being able to visualize other structures that before we couldn't, that all this information is coming into the surgeon. And I think it's the ability for a system to take all of that digital input and provide it to the surgeon and help them correlate it, whether it be, MRIs or CTs or intraoperative imaging or whatever it is, and integrate that all to help the surgeon actually see what they're doing better, is incredible. And then the natural progression, which is, really what I've been waiting for in robotics, was for miniaturization, to get back to the concept that our patients deserve smaller incisions and smaller footprints and space. And so, I think we're just on the forefront of that. I think we're at a point now where laparoscopy was, when I started doing probably in the mid 90s, where we really started to take on doing things in smaller patients. We started to get some smaller instrumentation. We started to get better visualization. We got better screens, and all those things enabled us to do more complex cases, and allowed us to do things like thoracoscopic TEFs and thoracoscopic lung resections and choledochocyst resections and all of those things. So I think it's been an evolution, and I would agree with the presenters right now that it seems like we're sort of reaching a new evolution where these things are starting to come together, and it can be very exciting. And certainly, I think that robotics can assist us in finer manipulation, especially when it's done in a miniaturized and a digital format. The other thing that Brian talked about, I think, is the collection of all this data. And we try to self-evaluate the cases we do. We try to teach when we're teaching residents, but sometimes a lot of finer points are lost, and we're not picking up necessarily in all the things. And so I think the ability to have all of this data available so that we can self-assess, or honestly, I think in the future we're going to be evaluated by others who will assess our performance. And so, but hopefully all this will go to clinically improve what we're doing.
Yeah. So it's a lot of data, right? You're saying where it's starting to come together, and Brian kind of talked about these, showing this data on a dashboard. I kind of think of the car dashboard while you're driving, where we're showing you here is some of the things that are happening while you're operating. And then, currently the dashboard that we're showing is, well, something to look at afterwards as to learn from these cases. How did this go? What are these different steps? So, Stephanie, I'm wondering if you have thoughts on, the kind of I think it's the first step in what these dashboards look like, and how do you think we'll be able to use the data that's there? I mean, we're able to see kind of strokes and numbers of cases and things, but where does your mind go as to what the potential something like a dashboard has?
I think the dashboard is really exciting. To build upon what Steve said related to assessment, I think the most important tool for quality improvement far and above for surgeons is your own data. And I think that's been proven as well, that receiving individual data is the best way to prompt change. So I think for us as surgeons, to be able to improve to see these sort of more detailed statistics, getting as detailed as, movements and strokes and things like that, being able to have all the video in one centralized location, I think that's super promising for us, and then as well as our trainees. Evaluation of trainees and evaluation of proficiency is continues to sort of move over time from more of just sort of the preceptorship model where you work with people and they kind of, they subjectively, think you're good to go, and people kind of progress along. It's already starting to become more objective, and they're trying to fit criteria. And I think that's going to move into the technical realm very soon. And so I think it will be good for us as a field to try to kind of stay ahead of things and start doing it on our own, so we can share that with our trainees. I think the other great potential benefit is efficiency. I mean, we all want that as surgeons, and so do our institutions. So to be able to harness that to, either be more cost effective by, which instruments do you use most frequently, and you can take that to your institution, and so to make the case of why you need these and why maybe you can eliminate some redundancy if you don't use them. You can look at times of things to try to improve that and improve throughput through the OR. I think that's as important as ever. So those two things are probably most exciting to me.
Yeah, this kind of pile of data showing on the on the dashboard, increasing efficiencies in the operating room, increasing our efficiencies as surgical performers or doing the cases. How can we be more efficient in those different types of maneuvers? Which kind of coming together into this question that's on my mind about research. How is this kind of data availability and real-time data, maybe too much data, going to change how we think about research or publish papers, and the demands on what you'll be asked to do as far as making changes based on kind of real-world data, how we do research projects. We're just getting to the point where we're able to show these data sets to clinicians and say, it's available now. Brian showed you some of those things on the dashboard, but what are some of the research projects? So I'll start with you, Stephanie. What are some of the research projects that you could think about as to how we could kind of pull these data sets together to prove something? And is it different now than it was in the past, where we would have randomized prospective clinical trials and that model?
Yeah. I think, well, one sort of thing that comes straight to mind would just be the number needed for proficiency. I mean, people have done this before for laparoscopic inguinal hernia repair and things like that, TEPS, like the number that you need to reach that kind of plateau. And that's been published and I think used in a practical sense. So I think those would be fairly straightforward things to do, although a little bit more challenging in pediatrics, where we have a wide variety of what relatively rare procedures, but with something like a dashboard, then you could potentially figure out ways about how do we combine this data cross-institutionally, because it's going to be in the same language, right? If it's the same dashboard. So it would make multi-institutional collaboration a lot easier, which is great. And we need it because the case volumes, no matter what you do, are still relatively low at any one given center for when you're taking care of children. So I think that would be really great. I mean, other things that you can do, honestly, are just sort of, you're going to have your own historical cohort. So you just purely look at, are things changing in terms of patient outcomes or efficiency, operative times, things like that, changing with utilization of the dashboard. Sometimes, with implementation of other things, NSQIP is like our surgical quality program nationally. People do sort of environmental studies where you look at, does does the presence of this not by itself improve quality or change things over time? So, but I think the list kind of goes on of potential research applications.
Yeah, Steve, what do you think? I mean, Stephanie mentioned NISQIP, some of these large data sets that are out there comparing, tying into these data sets, or just in general, what do you think? How is this kind of this digital data that we're generating influence our research efforts, and for better, for worse? You're on mute.
It's probably a bit of a mixed bag and maybe a little bit of a Pandora's box, because I think, one of the things, like, to get to a very basic level, surgeon X does a laparoscopic Nissen in an hour, and surgeon Y does laparoscopic Nissen in 90 minutes. And are their outcomes the same? And in terms of, OR availability, OR times, number of cases you can do, outcomes, a lot of that data will be in there. But I think it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit, honestly, like if you look at an airline pilot and what they go through and the training they go through and the standardization, I think we've had a hard time doing that in surgery. The people I train, 90% of what we do is pretty routine, or 85%. If you're doing, whether you're doing certain foregut surgery or lap chole or whatever it is, there's a very standard way you can go about it. And the anatomy and the size of the patient doesn't really change it much. And there are steps you should do. And I think where people always talk about some surgeons being fast, some being slow, but I think really what it is a lot of times it's efficiency in how doing it. And so I think this data can really help us look at the efficiency of a surgeon doing a specific task. And definitely some surgeons are going to be more skilled at manipulating tissue, but there's certain pieces of a case that are just efficiency. So for instance, if you're doing a lap Nissen and you flip the stomach back and forth 10 times during the case, you're probably very inefficient. And that data will be recorded in the system. Whereas another surgeon is going to flip the stomach once to take down some short gastrics, and that's going to be it. So it's not that surgeon A is necessarily better than surgeon B. It's not that they're quicker or can manipulate tissue better. They're just more efficient. And I think that's in a lot of cases where we can point that out, document it, and honestly do some research studies around it. Same thing for working in the pelvis. So I think it will help us make surgeons better. The question is, how are we really going to, cull all of that data, get at it in a meaningful way? And then, the concern will be that people outside of surgeons will use that data to make decisions that aren't necessarily medically or surgically driven. So I think that's why I talk about a little bit of a Pandora's box. But I think I think it definitely is going to be a realm where people who choose to be involved in that, we all want to be better. We all, we're not very good at evaluating and critically looking at our skills and how we approach things. And I think this will make it easier. Again, just like, an airline pilot who spends hours and hours in a simulator, for routine, but also for the critical things. I think this data will help us hopefully get better.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of the training. We say the word training, we think of residency training, but then there's training, for surgeons that are trying to figure out a new approach or do things a different way, that they're learning new approaches throughout their careers. This idea in the past, of our surgical history of see one, do one, teach one kind of a thing, I think is evolving in this sense to kind of see one, do one feedback. And that feedback piece is going to be easier with some of these digital kind of tools. it's going to be incumbent upon, this group to say, well, what kind of feedback do you need to make you more efficient, to make things move along a little bit faster, and how can we help provide you, as an industry kind of offering to make you more efficient by giving you the tools or giving you the right feedback at the right times on the right kind of metrics to move you along. And so that's something that we're working on in, these kind of tools that we're developing. One thing before we get to the next topic, just on this side of these different kinds of digital tools, Stephanie, I wanted to ask you about this idea of a telestration. You and I have talked about this a little bit, where you're able to kind of assist or give feedback during a case to somebody by not just kind of nodding your head while you're doing something and saying, no, grab there, no, there. You'll be able to telestrate or interact with other people in the case. How's that? I mean, that's I think we're on the verge of that. And how's that going to kind of impact things? You're in a big training program where you'll see a lot of people that I suspect you're giving those types of instructions to now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that will, especially, I'm speaking from the viewpoint of a pediatric surgeon, where we do a lot of routine things, as Steve said, appendectomies, things like that. But then there's also a real percentage of sort of unusual, complex. Every case is a little bit different. And I think when you're working with trainees, those are sometimes a little bit more challenging ones to get them involved or engaged. So, that's an obvious thing there. And the margins vary. It can be really small in a small patient and things like that. So, so to be able to be more specific, I think what's even, potentially more exciting is then can you involve people who aren't physically there in the room? Because I think there's a lot of interest in that for various reasons, to help patients, to help surgeons, educational, purposes, things like that. So I think once you start to develop that technology, it can extend even outside of the operating room. It has to be done the right way. There's a lot of considerations there, but if there's the possibility for, the world expert on something to be a part of an operation for a child that wouldn't otherwise have access to go see that person, or, there might be limitations on why they're, where they are, that's pretty exciting, I think.
Yeah, it's wide open in the future as to kind of what's possible, which so I'd like to kind of move into that next topic of, the future. We've talked about the potential applications and things, but Steve, I'm wondering your thoughts on the future of digital surgery. I mean, back in the 90s, like you mentioned, we had this vision of robotic surgery. And here we are, 25 years later, where it is a reality, but it took quite some time for that to come about as a reality, even right when we started seeing it. I wonder what your kind of advice or vision you would give to people that are in training now, or that are, in the middle of their careers. How fast are things changing now? What is a realistic timeline where we could see what developments of digital surgery in the future? These things like no-fly zones and these, which seem like, yeah, it's very cool, or remote surgery and the things that we've heard bits and pieces about, but aren't necessarily right now a reality. How long is all this going to take, and what would it look like when we get there?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to make one comment about the telementoring and the
Sure.
telestrating. We've actually been doing that for almost 20 years, and the techniques have gotten better and better. And I telementor people all the time, all over the world. The problem has been having the right access, being able to do that. We have people come in, but I think that's critical. And so what really excites me, that gets into the digital platform, and Stephanie mentioned this, is like, if you're doing, a complex anal rectal malformation, and you could be, you're a good skilled surgeon, you understand it, but why wouldn't you want the brain of, you know, Alberto Pena or Mark Levitt or somebody like that in the room with you, helping you identify structures, not that you can't do the surgery, but to help you be more efficient and to make sure you can see those things. And that I believe firmly. I mean, my vision is that, 5 years from now, I'll be sitting on my deck in the mountain, watching someone do surgery somewhere and helping them identify structures as they use all this integrated digital information while they're doing it, and I can do it from my laptop or my handheld or whatever it is. I think that kind of thing is invaluable, and I think the other piece is coming. And so I believe, because things have changed a lot in medicine, that I think a lot of our trainees are coming out with less exposure to more complex cases. So I think they don't have quite the breadth that, this is going to sound really old, but that I had when I came out, 33 years ago, 32 years ago, because because of differences in training and more programs and things like that, the huge volume and things you get exposed. But I still, every day, every year, I see things I've never seen before, so that's the beauty of our specialty. So I think having, a system that allows you to somehow use enhanced intelligence and augmented intelligence to identify structures that perhaps, because you don't have the experience, you might not have seen. So, no-fly zones that keeps you from cutting something that you shouldn't cut, or places that you shouldn't go. Haptics that are now coming into robotics that I think will, enable us to do finer movements in smaller places. Very frequently, if I'm helping someone do like a thoracoscopic lobectomy, I can see where the pulmonary artery is and they can't, or the branch that they need to go at. And so what I'm hopeful is that however you guys do it, and I'm not quite sure yet whether it's a combination of, overlying a CT scan that's active to the digital picture, whether it's a dye like ICG or some of the other dyes that are coming out that are going to now highlight certain anatomic features. And at some point, hopefully, parts of my brain or somebody else's brain who have done, hundreds or thousands of cases, that allows us to identify structures and know how to approach them, that can be incorporated into this digital framework that enhances the surgeon through the robot and all of this integrated information. And so, it's probably a horrifying thought to the people I train, but, it's like someone sitting at the console doing a thoracoscopic lobectomy, and they hear my voice in their ear saying, the pulmonary artery is 3 millimeters up and 3 millimeters over to where you are right now. And but I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think all that information will come in and will enable people to approach the difficult parts of these operations, perhaps with a bit more confidence and a bit more safety.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely. It is an exciting time, and will be fun to see how it kind of evolves. I think it's going to come quickly. Stephanie, just before we go to the questions, to see if there are any questions, I'm wondering, what advice you would have, or how are you looking towards the future for people that are going to be leaning into this, and how do you get up to speed on these new developments and stay involved, and those kind of things. It may be different kind of patterns than they were in the past, as for how people get connected and kind of integrate these new features into their practice, and specifically in pediatric, and for those interested in pediatric surgery.
Yeah, well, I mean, first I have to say I'm still learning myself. So with that caveat, I think the exciting thing about this is this is something where surgeons, we've already finished training, but we're going to be potentially taking up, new skills. I mean, we're all sort of lifelong learners and do it all the time, but I think it's sort of a really dedicated effort to sort of learn a new technology. So I think you have to be willing to do that. That is a lot of your own investment. You have to be willing to work with people at your institution, maybe some meetings, emails, things like that, lots of committees, all the things. And I think as the surgeon who's going to be, using it individually and hoping to impact, your patients for the better long term, you have to have a hand in that to help, make everybody understand why it's important. So there's that aspect of it. I think being able to network with other people at other institutions, and maybe they're using the same robotic device, maybe they're using a different platform. I think that's okay. It doesn't have to be someone doing the exact same thing as you with the exact same thing. I think people, taking up new technology, robotic or elsewhere, for complex procedures, you can learn a lot from them. I talk to colleagues who are doing robotics for hepatobiliary and pancreas surgery and things, and I have stuff to learn from them as well, and vice versa. They'll every once in a while be like, oh, you're doing that with what? And that didn't, you can do it with that small and only 3 trocars. Oh my gosh. So I think that's the other kind of cool thing, is you don't have to limit it to exactly what you're doing. So.
Great. Well, this has been great discussion. We brought up a lot of points. I think I'm going to kind of go back to make sure we have time to see if there's any other questions that Haley may have that came into the question section.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat at this time, but please go ahead and add those in if anybody has a question to ask, or you can use the raise hand feature and I can unmute you as well. I am curious, though, we touched a little bit on the interoperative tools, and Brian spoke about it at the beginning with his presentation as well. I'm curious from both Dr. Please and Dr. Rothenberg, if there's any specific cases that you guys had in mind that you would love to have interoperative tools like the measurement, digital tags, or any of the future tools Brian mentioned as well.
Well, I think as already talked about, I think, the eye tracking is a huge deal. I personally think I'm like the worst cameraman in the world, because I look at what I want to see and not necessarily what the surgeon sees. And I think the worst person in the world to run a camera is a medical student or a junior resident. I think it's a very dedicated and difficult task. And so I think having that steady view that is directed really by the surgeon is great. I think, some of the tissue tracking things can be helpful. Again, we don't currently have the system, but, in some of the hepatobiliary work we do, I think it would be helpful. I also think there's some in pull-throughs and things like that, being able to measure the length of colon that you're dealing with, especially when you're doing biopsies or you have there's a known amount that you can do. I think that's helpful. Specialty things like putting in gastric pacers, we're always measuring from the pylorus back. So I think those things will become more helpful. I'm very intrigued by the no-fly zones. I think there are a lot of inadvertent injuries, more than we know about, and can even happen to me that, suddenly, you've put a nick in the liver because you weren't really paying attention. And I think the ability to block out those areas so that you can't go there and create injury is going to be important. And then I think as this evolves, there'll be more and more of that will get integrated into making the surgeon safer. It's kind of like a little bit probably like riding a bike with or driving your car that has sensors that beep at you all the time. I mean, the last time I bumped into something when I was because I was driving a 25-year-old Land Cruiser that had none of those sensors, and I'm so used to having that sort of information talk to me, and suddenly when I'm without it, it's like you don't have as good a sense. So I think we'll become more and more dependent on those kind of things, and I think it's just going to take some time but especially in the small spaces that we work in, and hopefully that we can get to with things like the Say-Hand system, which will allow us to get smaller. I think those things have become more and more important.
Well, good. I think that kind of brings us back to the top of the hour again, and I'd like to thank both of you, Dr. Politis and Dr. Rothenberg, for joining us here today for this discussion in digital surgery. Kind of for the last word there, or maybe to add her 2 cents, I'd turn it back over to Bethany to say what else, and anything else to add, or how do you kind of bring it home for us?
Great. Well, thanks so much. I just would really like to thank all of the panelists and Brian and Asensus for all the support. Really happy that everyone was able to join. I hope to see everyone at IPEG. It's coming up June 19th to the 22nd, and Asensus will be present there. So if there are any additional questions for anyone from Asensus, please drop by and ask. But I think, this is a really wonderful platform, and the frontier of AI and the upcoming future technology that we'll be able to use is tremendous. So I think we'll just be seeing more and more, and thanks everyone for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Slater. We'll go ahead and put that survey back up as well, and I've also put it in the chat. We would love to hear from you if you have a few minutes. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.